In 1917, two men with $36,000 and a single prototype truck started a company in a small Wisconsin town that nobody had heard of. Today, that company supplies the backbone of the United States Army's logistics fleet, has delivered more than 100,000 military vehicles to battlefields across 5 continents, and holds contracts worth tens of billions of dollars with the most powerful military force in human history. Walk into any active combat zone the United States has operated in over the past 40 years, the blistering sands of Saudi Arabia during Desert Storm, the bombed-out roads of Baghdad, the mountain passes of Afghanistan, and you will find the same name stenciled on the side of the trucks, keeping soldiers alive and armies moving: Oshkosh. These are not elegant machines, they are not glamorous, they do not appear in movie posters or inspire fan clubs. They weigh tens of thousands of pounds. They carry fuel and ammunition and broken tanks through terrain that would swallow ordinary vehicles whole. They are the workhorses of modern warfare, and for over a century, they have never stopped getting better. By 2024, Oshkosh Corporation reported revenues of $10.73 billion. The defense segment alone operated in the hundreds of millions of dollars per quarter. The company employs approximately 15,000 people across 130 facilities in 24 countries. And it all began with 2 men who couldn't get Ford to return their calls. So how does a small truck company, built on a single 4-wheel drive patent, survive 2 world wars, the Cold War, the War on Terror, and now the age of electric vehicles and autonomous machines? How does it keep reinventing itself without ever losing what made it essential? This is the story of a company that learned one thing above all others: the ground never stops changing, and neither should the truck. Welcome to the military truck revolution, the century-long evolution of Oshkosh, the most indispensable manufacturer the American war machine has ever relied upon. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. This is one of those stories that starts with 2 men being rejected by Ford and ends with the United States Army. Let's get into it. May 1917, Clintonville, Wisconsin. The town is quiet, modest, the kind of place where ambition tends to go unnoticed. But inside a small workshop on the edge of Clintonville, 2 men are doing something that nobody in America's automobile industry thought was worth their time. They are building a truck that can drive with all 4 of its wheels simultaneously. William R. Besedick was the engineer. Bernhard A. Mosling was the businessman. Together, they had spent years developing and patenting innovations in 4-wheel drive technology, a differential system in 1914, and a front axle design the following year. The patents were real. The engineering was sound. But nobody in the automotive establishment wanted anything to do with them. Ford said no. Packard said no. Studebaker said no. The biggest names in the American automobile industry looked at Besedick and Mosling's designs and saw no future in them. 2-wheel drive trucks were everywhere. The market was established. The roads, at least in cities, were improving. Why complicate things? What those executives failed to see was that most of America did not live on city roads. Out in the farmland, out in the snowfields, out in the construction sites and lumber camps and mining operations that powered the American economy, the roads were mud, gravel, ice, and nothing at all. A truck that could pull itself through any terrain was not just a curiosity, it was a revolution. Besedick and Mosling decided to build it themselves. Mosling sold stock in the new venture, raising $250,000 in capital from investors, many of them based in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, a city 47 miles to the south of Clintonville. Besedick, meanwhile, bent over his drafting tables and his metalwork and produced a prototype. They named it Old Betsy. It was a 4-cylinder, 3-speed truck weighing approximately 3,000 pounds, and it ran. The investors were impressed. The company relocated to Oshkosh before the year was out. It took a new name, the Oshkosh Motor Truck Manufacturing Company. The first production model, the Model A, went on sale at $3,500. 7 were sold in 1918. 7 trucks. That was the beginning. No military contracts, no defense budget, just 2 men and a rejected idea that had nowhere left to go but forward. But what they had built wasn't just a truck. They had built a foundation for something nobody could yet imagine. 1923, Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The factory floor was nearly silent. In a year when the company should have been growing, only 16 trucks rolled out of the Oshkosh plant. 16. 2 years earlier, sales had stood at 62. Before that, at 142.
The trajectory had been heading upward. And then the bottom fell out. The collapse was not of Oshkosh's making, but it nearly destroyed the company regardless. The end of World War I had triggered a post-war economic depression that squeezed manufacturing across the country. Worse, the federal government had taken millions of surplus military trucks and donated them freely to cities and municipalities. Why would a town buy an Oshkosh truck when the government was handing out vehicles for nothing? The math was brutal and simple. Sales shrank. Workers were let go. The future of the company grew genuinely uncertain. In 1922, Bernhard Mosling stepped in and replaced Besedich as company president, steadying the ship through force of will and financial discipline. Besedich faded from the story he had helped create. Mosling stayed. The company did not fold. It adapted. In 1925, Oshkosh introduced the Model H, a powerful truck fitted with a 6-cylinder engine, purpose-designed for road construction and snow removal. Municipalities needed machines that could clear runways and highways. Oshkosh built exactly that. The Model H sold well enough to keep the lights on through the second half of a difficult decade. Then came the Great Depression of 1930. The blow was severe. The company was forced to reorganize entirely, re-emerging under a restructured entity with a new management configuration. R.W. Mackey took the presidency while Mosling concentrated on sales. But the DNA of the company, the stubborn conviction that four-wheel drive was the future, remained intact. 2 new models appeared in 1932, the FC and the FB, both powered by 6-cylinder gasoline engines. Slowly, painfully, the company found its footing again. The Model H continued selling to road crews and snow removal operations. The industrial market, mining, oil fields, agriculture, provided a steady trickle of orders. The lesson of those lean years was painful and permanent. Dependency on a single customer or a single application was a death sentence. To survive, Oshkosh would always need to be useful to more than one world. That lesson would serve them well, because an entirely different world, a world at war, was approaching faster than anyone in Wisconsin could see. 1939. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Europe was burning. The German Wehrmacht had crossed into Poland, and the United States, not yet at war, was watching with profound unease. Inside the American military establishment, procurement officers were quietly beginning to assess what a modern war would require in terms of vehicles, logistics, and mobility. The answers pointed toward machines that could do things conventional trucks simply could not. Oshkosh had spent years building trucks for mining operations, snowfields, and construction sites, places where ordinary vehicles became useless. When the US Army Corps of Engineers began searching for a vehicle that could clear ice and snow from Air Corps runways and perform general wrecker operations in demanding conditions, Oshkosh had exactly what they needed. The company's W-Series truck, specifically the model W700, won the contract. It was Oshkosh's first significant entry into military production, not a glamorous combat vehicle, not a tank or a gun platform, a workhorse for clearing runways and moving broken equipment, but a military workhorse nonetheless. The foot was in the door,
As the United States entered World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Oshkosh's role expanded. Between 1943 and 1945, the company delivered 988 W-Series snowplow trucks to branches of the US military. These machines cleared the runways that allowed American aircraft to fly, maintaining the air operations that were central to Allied strategy on every front. Near the end of the war, production began on the W1600, a heavier truck driven by all three of its axles, designed for off-road operation in oil fields and for hauling heavily laden trailers across broken terrain. Bernhard Mosling stepped back into the presidency in 1944 as the war entered its final phase, ensuring continuity of leadership during a critical period. The post-war years brought new energy. In 1947, Oshkosh introduced the W2200, a truck capable of running on either gasoline or diesel and virtually unmatched in the size of snowplows it could accommodate. Mining companies bought it by the fleet. Sugar plantations in tropical climates purchased it for hauling heavy loads between fields and processors. But here's the thing. The military relationship had been established. The US Armed Forces now knew what Oshkosh could do, and the Cold War was just beginning. The contracts that followed would change the company's identity forever. 1955. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The factory that had once sold 16 trucks in an entire year was now shipping machines across the country on a pace nobody in 1923 could have imagined. The post-war American economy was roaring. Roads being poured, bridges being built, cities expanding at a rate that demanded concrete by the millions of tons. And Oshkosh, which had always been a company about moving things through difficult terrain, saw an opportunity. In 1955, Oshkosh introduced the Model 5050, the first truck in American history designed specifically for hauling concrete. It was a four-wheel drive machine, built to drive in and out of construction sites without becoming mired in the churned mud that surrounds every poured foundation. Contractors loved it. The ready-mix industry built its modern operations around it. Sales climbed. At the same time, the defense contracts kept growing. In 1950, the company had received its first major post-war defense order, 1,000 WT-2206 snow removal vehicles for the US military. In 1953, Oshkosh delivered its first aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicle, an ARF truck, to the US Coast Guard. A year later, the 5,000th Oshkosh truck rolled off the production line. Bernhard Mosling's son, John Mosling, succeeded his father as president in 1956, keeping the company and the family that had helped build it from nothing. Meanwhile, on the military side, the Cold War was creating an insatiable appetite for logistics vehicles. The US Army needed trucks that could move equipment anywhere, across frozen tundra, desert plains, jungle mud. Oshkosh's core competency, built on 2 decades of civilian off-road work, aligned perfectly with those requirements. In 1968, Oshkosh designed and built the U-30 tow tractor, 45 units destined for the US Air Force, purpose-built to tow the massive Lockheed C-5 Galaxy transport aircraft. It was a niche contract, but it demonstrated something crucial. Oshkosh could engineer to specification for the most demanding applications imaginable. By the early 1970s, the dual revenue streams, concrete and construction on one side, military contracts on the other, were keeping the company healthy and growing. John Mosling changed the company's name to Oshkosh Truck Corporation in 1967, a simple acknowledgement that what they were building had outgrown every earlier definition. The foundation was solid, the military relationship was deepening, and a contract was coming that would alter the company's trajectory forever. If you're finding this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these deep dives into history. We're about to get into the contract that turned Oshkosh into a true military powerhouse, and it started with 744 trucks. 1976. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Inside the Oshkosh plant, the production lines were humming at a pace the founders could never have envisioned. The company had won a contract from the US Army to supply 744 M911 heavy equipment transporters, massive machines designed to move tanks and other oversized military hardware across road networks that were never designed to carry such weight. The M911 was a beast, and delivering it on time and on specification proved to the Army that Oshkosh was something special. It was the beginning of a relationship that would eventually make Oshkosh Defense the sole supplier of medium and heavy tactical trucks to both the US Army and the Marine Corps. Not one of several suppliers, the sole supplier. That distinction does not come from winning a single contract. It comes from being reliable, innovative, and technically superior year after year after year. The 1980s were an era of aggressive military procurement. The Reagan administration's defense buildup sent money pouring into the American armed forces, and Oshkosh was positioned perfectly to receive it. In 1982, the company revenues stood at $86 million. By 1986, they had climbed to $400 million. Net income advanced from $3.4 million to $24.8 million in the same span. The company had not recorded a losing year since 1930. The contracts came in a cascade. In 1984, the US Air Force awarded Oshkosh a deal to deliver 715 P-19 ARFF vehicles, aircraft rescue and firefighting trucks designed for airbase emergency response. In 1985, Oshkosh delivered 1,400 logistics vehicle system trucks to the US Marines. The LVS was a modular vehicle with interchangeable rear sections, allowing a single platform to serve multiple mission requirements. The following year, the Air Force came back with another contract, 787 R-11 aircraft refuelers worth $78 million over 3 years. These were not warfighting vehicles. They were the veins and arteries of military air operations, the machines that kept aircraft fueled and flying. Then came the contract that would define Oshkosh for a generation, the Heavy Expanded Mobility Tactical Truck Program, the HEMTT. It would become the most famous truck Oshkosh ever built, and the backbone of the US Army's logistics system for decades. The test of that machine was coming, and the test would be called Desert Storm. February 1991, the Saudi-Iraqi border. The ground war of Operation Desert Storm had begun just hours earlier. The 7th Corps was executing a massive sweep around the Iraqi right flank, a maneuver requiring the movement of fuel, ammunition, and supplies across hundreds of miles of open desert. The terrain was punishing. Deep sand, rocks, mud, the kind of landscape designed to break machines. The M977 Heavy Expanded Mobility Tactical Truck, the HEMTT, nicknamed the Dragon Wagon, was being pushed to its absolute limit. And it did not break. The HEMTT had entered US Army service in 1982 as a replacement for the aging M520 Goa truck. An 8x8 diesel-powered machine, it carried a 10 short-ton payload, could ford water 48 inches deep, and could push through grades of 60%. Powered initially by a 450-horsepower Detroit diesel engine and fitted with an Allison automatic transmission, it was built for exactly the punishment it was receiving in the Saudi desert. A post-war review by officers of the 18th Field Artillery Brigade summarized what happened in stark terms. The HEMTT, they reported, could traverse all types of terrain, deep sand, mud, rocks, at full load. It never got stuck. It did not break down. The commander of the 1st Armoured Division Artillery later recommended that every truck operating forward of a division's rear area should belong to either the HMMWV or HEMTT family. Those were not polite bureaucratic compliments. Those were battlefield assessments from officers who had staked their soldiers' lives on a machine performing as advertised. By the second quarter of 2021, around 35,800 HEMTTs in various configurations had been produced through new build contracts alone. A further 14,000 had been remanufactured. Latest variants carried the A4 suffix, rebuilt, re-engineered, fitted with a 515 horsepower engine and newer transmission systems, but carrying the same essential design philosophy that had worked in the Saudi desert. What the Gulf War proved was not merely that Oshkosh made durable trucks. It proved something more fundamental, that the American military's ability to project power depended, in an essential and unglamorous way, on a factory in Wisconsin that most Americans had never heard of. The Dragon Wagon went to war and came back with its reputation not merely intact, but legendary. And now the Army wanted more, bigger, faster, smarter. 1996, Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The Army did not limit itself to heavy trucks. It needed a comprehensive family of tactical vehicles spanning multiple weight classes, capable of performing dozens of different logistics missions with standardized parts and common maintenance procedures. The result was the Family of Medium Tactical Vehicles, the FMTV, a system of 2.5-ton and 5-ton trucks that would become the US Army's standard medium transport across every branch of service. The FMTV program had initially been awarded to Stewart and Stevenson in 1996, then passed to Armour Holdings in 2006, and subsequently to BAE Systems Platforms and Services. But in August of 2009, the Department of Defense awarded Oshkosh a contract valued at $280.9 million for the production and delivery of 2,571 trucks and trailers under the FMTV Rebuy program, a 5-year requirements contract for up to 23,000 medium payload tactical vehicles and trailers, plus support services and engineering. Competitors protested. The Government Accountability Office initially upheld portions of those protests, and the Army briefly issued a stop work order. But on February 12, 2010, the Army affirmed the Oshkosh contract award and cancelled the stop work order following a peer review by the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Oshkosh kept building. On February 7, 2018, the Army awarded Oshkosh Defense the FMTV A2 contract, a next-generation upgrade program. By August 2021, Oshkosh had built approximately 40,000 FMTVs for the US military and international partners. They were everywhere. They carried everything. In August 2024, the US Army renewed its $1.5 billion contract for the Family of Heavy Tactical Vehicles, which included a $231.9 million rider for upgrading existing vehicles in service through 2031. The company was no longer simply a vendor, it was infrastructure. The US Army does not field medium or heavy tactical trucks without Oshkosh. That position, achieved through decades of reliability, innovation, and precision delivery, is as close to irreplaceable as any defense contractor in America has ever come. But the most dangerous moment in that history of trust was still ahead. A new kind of war had arrived. A war that would expose the limitations of every vehicle in the existing fleet, and it would demand something nobody in Oshkosh had yet designed. 2004, Fallujah, Iraq. The Humvee had been the light tactical vehicle of the US military for 2 decades. Agile, versatile, and designed for a battlefield that nobody had anticipated would look like this one. The improvised explosive device, the IED, was being buried in roads, hidden under trash piles, detonated by cell phones and garage door openers. The Humvee's floor offered negligible protection against underbody blasts. Soldiers were dying not from firefights, but from the ground beneath their wheels. The US military responded with urgency, bordering on desperation. Mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, were rushed into production and procurement at a scale that defied normal acquisition timelines. The Pentagon ultimately spent nearly $50 billion buying approximately 29,000 MRAP vehicles for use in Iraq and Afghanistan. Oshkosh produced thousands of the MATV variant, the MRAP all-terrain vehicle, a medium-weight mine-blast-protected machine purpose-developed for Afghanistan, where the original larger MRAPs had mobility problems in mountain terrain. The MATV was a different kind of Oshkosh vehicle, heavier than anything they had built for light tactical purposes. Armoured, designed from the wheels up around the threat of underbody blasts and ambush attacks. It incorporated the TAC-4 independent suspension system, Oshkosh's proprietary technology, which gave it off-road capability that the larger, more cumbersome MRAPs lacked. Thousands of MATVs deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. Thousands more were subsequently scrapped, mothballed, or transferred to police departments when US forces withdrew, because the military had never intended MRAPs as a permanent fleet solution. They were an emergency measure, a response to an immediate crisis, but they left an enormous gap in understanding. What the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan demonstrated, with terrible clarity measured in soldiers' lives, was that the existing spectrum of military vehicles could not cover every threat environment simultaneously. The Humvee was mobile but unprotected. The MRAP was protected but immobile. The Army needed something in between, something that did not yet exist. The idea for that vehicle had been forming since 2006. It would take nearly a decade to build. It would go through years of competition, protest, and engineering iteration. And in the summer of 2015, it would make Oshkosh the winner of one of the largest tactical vehicle contracts in American history. August 25, 2015, Arlington, Virginia. The U.S. Army's Tank Automotive and Armaments Command announced the winner of the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle Production Contract. The competitors had been Lockheed Martin, the world's largest defense contractor, and AM General, the company that built the Humvee. The contract was worth $6.7 billion for the first 16,901 vehicles, with total program estimates reaching as high as $47.6 billion. It was one of the most consequential tactical vehicle contracts in the history of the American military. Oshkosh won. The vehicle that won it was the LATV, Light Combat Tactical All-Terrain Vehicle, which Oshkosh had first introduced in 2011, after 4 years of development dating back to 2007. Drawing on 10 years of operational experience with its heavy, medium, and MRAP fleets in Iraq and Afghanistan. The LATV had gone through engineering and manufacturing development beginning in 2012, passed limited user testing with the Army and Marine Corps in 2014, and submitted its final proposal in February 2015. The LATV's performance during testing was decisive. During evaluation, data revealed that the Oshkosh vehicle lasted nearly 6 times longer between significant breakdowns than its closest competitor. Lockheed Martin protested the award in the Court of Federal Claims, then withdrew the protest in February 2016, likely after reviewing the same testing data. What the LATV offered was the convergence of 3 capabilities that no single vehicle had previously achieved simultaneously: the ballistic protection of a light tank, the underbody blast protection of an MRAP class vehicle, and the off-road mobility of a purpose-built racing machine. The TAK-4I Intelligent Independent Suspension System allowed 20 inches of wheel travel. The vehicle could negotiate terrain at speeds 70% faster than the Oshkosh MATV, already among the most capable off-road military vehicles in existence. The first delivery order came in March 2016, 657 vehicles for the US Army. The Marine Corps achieved initial operational capability in 2019. By 2025, Oshkosh had delivered over 22,000 JLTVs to US forces and allied governments across the globe. In 2023, the Army awarded the JLTV follow-on contract to AM General. Oshkosh had built the vehicle and proven its worth. The production torch was passed, but Oshkosh retained the right to supply JLTVs directly to allied countries, and the next chapter of the company's story was already being written. We're halfway through this incredible story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything. What comes next is the part of the Oshkosh story that most people don't know. where the company stops being just a defense contractor and starts building the future. 2006. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The defense budgets that had fueled Oshkosh's extraordinary growth through the 1980s were not going to last forever. Company leadership had understood that risk since the Cold War began winding down in the late 1980s. The strategy to address it was deliberate and aggressive. Acquisition, diversification, and the systematic expansion of the company's portfolio into markets far beyond military vehicles. The most transformative single acquisition in the company's history came on October 16, 2006, when Oshkosh announced an agreement to purchase JLG Industries for $3 billion. JLG was not a truck company. It was the world's leading manufacturer of aerial work platforms, scissor lifts, boom lifts, telehandlers, and low-level access equipment. The industries it served, construction, facilities maintenance, industrial manufacturing, moved in cycles almost perfectly inverse to the defense budget cycle. When the military was flush and building, civilian construction sometimes softened. When defense budgets contracted, infrastructure spending often expanded. The JLG acquisition was a hedge. It was also a statement. Oshkosh was no longer just a truck manufacturer. It was an industrial conglomerate built around the concept of purpose-built specialty equipment for demanding environments. In February 2008, the company's shareholders approved a formal name change from Oshkosh Truck Corporation to Oshkosh Corporation, reflecting a business that now spanned 4 distinct segments: defense, access equipment, fire and emergency, and commercial. Earlier acquisitions had already been building this breadth. Pierce Manufacturing, the Wisconsin-based fire apparatus manufacturer, had been acquired in 1996. McNeilus Companies, makers of refuse collection vehicles and concrete mixers, joined in 1998. Jerdan Corporation, towing and recovery vehicles, in 2004. By 2009, consolidated sales reached approximately $6.4 billion. The defense segment represented 61% of that figure, access equipment, 14%, fire and emergency, 18%, commercial, 7%. The balance was not perfect, but it was far more resilient than the company had been when military contracts made up the overwhelming majority of its revenue. The business architecture that Besedick and Mosling could never have conceived was now in place. A company that built trucks for armies also built the machines that lift workers to maintain your airport, collect your trash, and fight the fires that might destroy your home. But the next transformation was the most audacious one yet, and it had nothing to do with conventional vehicles at all. February 2021, Washington, D.C. The United States Postal Service announced a decision that stunned observers of both the automotive and defense industries. Oshkosh Defense had won the contract to design and build the Next Generation Delivery Vehicle, the NGDV, the replacement for the aging fleet of postal delivery trucks that had been rolling American streets since 1987. The contract covered between 50,000 and 165,000 units over 10 years. The value could exceed $6 billion. The winner was not General Motors, not Ford, not any of the companies that had traditionally built vehicles for the Postal Service. The winner was the defense contractor from Wisconsin that built tanks transporters and armored trucks for the U.S. Army. The choice was not as improbable as it appeared. The NGDV program required a vehicle purpose-built from the ground up, not adapted from an existing consumer platform. It had to survive the most punishing delivery schedule imaginable: daily stop-and-go operation in every climate condition in the United States, from the frozen streets of Minneapolis to the scorching desert corridors of Phoenix, operated by drivers who would park, walk, deliver, and return to the cab hundreds of times per day. That kind of engineering challenge was exactly what Oshkosh had spent a century solving. The NGDV would be offered in both internal combustion and battery electric configurations. The electric variant represented Oshkosh's direct entry into the electrification era, not as an experiment or a prototype, but as a production vehicle under contract to the largest single fleet operator in the United States. Oshkosh broke ground on a new manufacturing facility in Spartanburg, South Carolina, specifically for NGDV production. Low-rate initial production began in the second quarter of 2024. Defense segment sales for that quarter increased 20.2% year-over-year to $598.7 million, driven in part by the commencement of NGDV production. By the fourth quarter of 2024, NGDV vehicles were being fielded, postal carriers using them for daily deliveries, with early feedback described as encouraging by company leadership. Full-rate production was targeted for the second half of 2025. The truck that started with 7 units in 1918 was now being built by the tens of thousands to deliver America's mail, and the most radical version of it ran entirely on electricity. 2012. Oshkosh Defense Engineering Center, Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Inside the test facility, engineers were putting a prototype through simulations that would have been unimaginable to the men who built Old Betsy in 1917. Hydraulic actuators replicated the forces of underbody blasts. High-speed cameras captured suspension movement across boulder fields. Computer models predicted failure modes before a single physical component was stressed. The goal was not simply to build a truck. The goal was to build a system. The TAC-4i, Oshkosh's patented Intelligent Independent Suspension, represented the culmination of decades of suspension engineering that had begun with the basic mechanical systems of the W-Series trucks in the 1930s. Each wheel operated independently, allowing 20 inches of vertical travel. The system could raise or lower the vehicle on the fly, adjusting ground clearance to match the terrain being traversed in real time. For military applications, the implications were profound. A convoy moving through mountainous terrain could maintain road contact on surfaces that would high-center conventional vehicles. A disabled vehicle could be approached and recovered without the recovery truck itself becoming stuck. In speed trials, vehicles equipped with TAC-4i traversed rough off-road terrain at rates 70% faster than vehicles using earlier suspension technology, meaning the same resupply mission could be completed in significantly less time, reducing exposure to ambush and extending the operational range of the supply chain. Oshkosh held the patent. Nobody else could replicate it without licensing the technology, and the company had no intention of licensing it to competitors. The suspension system became a structural moat around the JLTV program, a technological advantage so measurable that testing data alone was enough to persuade Army evaluators, even over the protests of Lockheed Martin. Beyond the suspension, Oshkosh was investing in autonomous vehicle technology through its Terramax program, remote-controlled and autonomous convoy following systems that could allow driver-optional operation in high-threat environments, removing soldiers from vulnerable positions on improvised explosive device-laden roads. The MATV, fitted with Terramax hardware, demonstrated convoy-following capability in testing scenarios replicating the routes that had cost American lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. Engineering was never separate from the mission at Oshkosh. Every bolt and every algorithm existed in the context of a person who would depend on it. That philosophy, engineering as a moral obligation, not merely a technical one, was woven into the culture of the company. And it was about to be tested by a future that was changing at a speed nobody inside any factory in Wisconsin had ever seen before. 2024. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The factory that had begun with 7 trucks in 1918 now operated within a $10.73 billion corporation across 24 countries. The defense segment alone generated revenues measured in hundreds of millions of dollars per quarter. The NGDV lines were ramping up in South Carolina. FMTV and HEMTT contracts continued flowing from the Pentagon. And in boardrooms and engineering centers across the campus, the conversation was about something that had never entered the calculations of William Besserdich or Bernhard Mosling: the future of warfare itself. Modern battlefields are not simply contested by soldiers and tanks. They are contested by data, by electronic warfare, by drones that can surveil, target, and strike with a precision and scale that earlier generations could not have imagined. The vehicles that survive and succeed in that environment are not simply the strongest or the most armored. They are the most connected, the most adaptable, the most survivable against threats that approach from directions, literal and electromagnetic, that do not appear on any historical map. Oshkosh's JLTV had been designed with network connectivity from the outset, the first light tactical vehicle purpose-built for the digital battlefield. Its plug-and-play architecture allowed the integration of remote weapon systems, electronic countermeasures, and advanced sensors without structural modification. Over 100 different mission package configurations existed for the general-purpose platform alone, allowing a single vehicle design to be tailored for reconnaissance, convoy escort, heavy gun carrier, or close combat weapon carrier missions. In August 2024, the US Army renewed the $1.5 billion Family of Heavy Tactical Vehicles contract, HEMTT, PLS, HET, with Oshkosh, covering production through 2031. The company was simultaneously managing NGDV ramp-up, FMTV A2 production, FHTV modernization, and international JLTV foreign military sales to NATO allies including Lithuania and Slovenia. The revenue structure that had once been dangerously dependent on a single segment was now genuinely diversified. Access equipment, fire and emergency, commercial vehicles, defense. 4 segments, each operating in distinct market cycles, each capable of sustaining the company while others contracted. But the question that hung over every strategy meeting was the same question that had haunted American defense manufacturers since the end of the Cold War. What does the next war look like? And does this company know how to build for it? Oshkosh had answered that question correctly in 1939, in 1982, in 2004. The bet was that it would answer it correctly again. Stand inside the Oshkosh Global Headquarters today and look at Old Betsy, the original prototype, still running, still displayed proudly in the building built on the grounds of a century-old golf course along the shore of Lake Butte des Morts. It is 3,000 pounds of 4-cylinder iron. It has no computer, no armor, no independent suspension, no plug-and-play weapons bay. It is a truck built by 2 men who couldn't get Ford to return their calls. Now walk outside and look at what the company that truck built. The first lesson embedded in this story is the power of specificity. William Besserdich and Bernhard Mosling did not try to build every kind of truck for every kind of customer. They built one kind of truck, the truck that could go where others could not. Every contract they ever won, every battlefield they ever served, every emergency they ever answered, flowed from that single, irreducible conviction. The terrain will always be harder than you expect, and your vehicle had better be ready for it. Generalists survive in markets. Specialists build empires. The second lesson is that a company's greatest asset is its willingness to be tested. Oshkosh did not ask for the Gulf War. It did not ask for the roads of Fallujah or the mountain passes of Kandahar. Those environments found Oshkosh's machines, and those machines survived. Every HEMTT that never got stuck in the Saudi sand was a marketing event more powerful than any advertisement. Every MATV that absorbed a blast and brought its crew home intact was a contract renewal written in the most convincing language available. There is no substitute for performance when the stakes are real. The third lesson is that reinvention is not disloyalty to identity. When Oshkosh bought JLG Industries in 2006, some observers questioned whether a military truck maker belonged in the aerial lift business. The answer, as it turned out, was yes. Because the company was not fundamentally a military truck maker. It was an engineering organization that built purpose-built machines for demanding environments. That identity could accommodate scissor lifts and postal vehicles just as naturally as it accommodated tank transporters. From 7 trucks in 1918 to $10.73 billion in revenue in 2024. From a £3,000 prototype in a Wisconsin workshop to vehicles on every continent, in every climate, in every conflict the United States has waged for more than 80 years. Old Betsy still runs. The company built around it still evolves. And somewhere in an engineering center in Oshkosh tonight, someone is already designing the truck that will serve a battlefield nobody has yet imagined. Because that has always been the work, and the work has never stopped.